I've lived through almost the entire American century. I watched this country rise from the ashes of the Depression to become the most powerful economic force the world has ever seen. I watched us win World War II, not just with military might, but with productive capacity. We built more ships, more planes, more tanks than everyone else combined. That wasn't luck. That was capability. That was real productive power. And now I'm watching it slip away, not because of some external enemy, not because of bad luck or unforeseen circumstances, but because of a pattern that has played out 3 times before in the last 500 years. And we're following it with terrifying precision. Let me tell you something that is going to make you uncomfortable. China just crossed $18.6 trillion in GDP. America sits at $29 trillion. Most people look at those numbers and they think, see, we're still way ahead, we're fine. But those people don't understand how empires fall. They don't understand the pattern, because it is never the absolute numbers that matter. It is the trajectory, it is the direction you're moving, and more importantly, it is what is behind those numbers. Are they real? Are they based on productive capacity? Or are they based on printing money and importing goods made by other people? I remember, and this is going way back now, but I remember when America produced half of everything in the world, 1945 to 1970. We made 50% of global GDP. We had 70% of the world's gold reserves. We built cars in Detroit. We made steel in Pittsburgh. We manufactured electronics, textiles, everything. If you wanted something made, it was made in America. The dollar was backed by something real. Not just gold, though, we had that too, but productive capacity. When someone held dollars, they knew those dollars could buy actual American-made goods, real products, real value. That is foundation. That is stage one. Korea came up from nothing. You want to talk about work ethic? Those people worked 84 hours a week with no overtime for more than a decade. And at the same time, every Korean child came home from school and worked with a tutor for 4 full hours in the afternoon and evening. Driven by tiger moms, you surprised when you lose to people like that. Only if you're a total idiot. That is what stage one looks like. Building, producing, sacrificing today for tomorrow. Real wealth creation, not financial engineering. Then came stage two, and stage two is dangerous because it feels good. It feels like you've made it. This is where America has been since 1971. Let me tell you about that year because most people don't understand how significant it was. August 15th, 1971. Richard Nixon goes on television and he announces that the United States will no longer convert dollars to gold. Just like that, the Bretton Woods system, the thing that had anchored the global monetary system since 1944, he killed it. Why? Because we'd been printing so many dollars to fund the Vietnam War, to fund social programs, to fund everything, that foreign governments started showing up saying, we'd like our gold back, please. And we didn't have enough. So Nixon just cut the cord. The dollar stopped being backed by gold. It started being backed by trust, by promises, by military power. Pure fiat currency, and you know what happened after that? The trade deficits began. Every single year since 1976, America has imported more than it exports. 48 consecutive years. Let that sink in. 48 years of consuming more than we produce. Manufacturing collapsed from 30% of GDP to 11% today. 11%. We stopped making things, but we kept spending. We kept printing. And the world kept accepting our dollars because they needed them for oil, for trade, for reserves. They trusted us. They thought the American economy was solid. And for a while, it was. The momentum from stage one carried us through. The national debt exploded. $1 trillion in 1980, $36 trillion today. That is a 36-fold increase in 43 years. And here is the thing that should terrify you. This is exactly what Britain did, exactly what the Dutch did, exactly what Spain did. Stage two always feels sustainable until suddenly it isn't. I've said before, China and the United States have to get along. Each country would be out of its mind not to get along with the other. I think trade helps us to get along. I don't want to stop having free trade with a big nuclear power like China, but trade has to be balanced, or at least sustainable. You can run a trade deficit for a while if you're investing that borrowed capital into productive capacity, into infrastructure, into education, into things that create future wealth. But if you're just consuming, if you're using borrowed money to buy consumer goods made by other people, that is not sustainable. That is stage 2 behavior, and it always ends the same way. Which brings us to stage 3, the crisis of overextension. And this is where we are right now. This is where the dominant power makes their fatal mistake. The math stops working. You're printing currency backed by nothing. But a rising power is building real production capacity, real factories, real infrastructure. Smart money starts moving. Nations start diversifying their reserves. Trade starts settling in alternative currencies. And the dominant power panics. They can't let their currency lose status. It is the source of their power. It is what allows them to keep spending, keep printing, keep running deficits. So they weaponize it. They sanction rivals. They freeze assets. They use financial access as a political tool. 2022, America froze $300 billion in Russian reserves overnight. Gone just like that. Think about that. Russia held U.S. Treasury bonds. They held dollars. They thought those assets were safe, and in one day, America took them. That sent shockwaves through every central bank on earth. China saw it. Saudi Arabia saw it. Brazil saw it. Every single country holding dollar reserves suddenly realized something. If America disagrees with your politics, they can take your wealth. Just like that, no due process, no courts. Just gone. So what happened? They started hedging fast. The dollar's share of global reserves has dropped from 71% in 2000 to 58% today. 13% gone in 2 decades. That is the fastest decline since the British pound collapsed. BRICS nations are building alternative payment systems. Russia and China settled $400 billion in trade using yuan and rubles in 2023. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil. Think about that. Saudi Arabia, our closest ally in the Middle East, accepting Chinese currency for oil. Brazil and China trade in their own currencies, bypassing the dollar entirely. Central banks are buying gold at record pace. 1,000 tons in 2023, highest in 50 years. Why? Because gold can't be frozen. Gold isn't someone else's liability. Gold is gold. It is real. It is neutral. It survives transitions. De-dollarization isn't a theory. It is happening. It is measurable. It is accelerating. And every single sign points to stage 3, loss of control. Now let me tell you what makes this truly terrifying. China's GDP just hit 18.6 trillion, growing at 5% annually. America's at 29 trillion, growing at 2.5%. Do the math. China overtakes America by 2035, maybe sooner. But that is not even the real story. The real story is production. China manufactures 30% of global goods. America makes 11%. China produces more steel than the rest of the world combined. More solar panels, more electric vehicles, more ships. China graduates 4 times more engineers than America every year. 4 times. They file more patents. They build more infrastructure. They invest 40% of GDP into production. America invests 20%. This is stage 1 behavior, building, producing, accumulating real capacity, while America is deep in stage 2 behavior, consuming, printing, financializing. I've watched Korea do this. I've watched them come from nothing. I said it before, they worked 84-hour weeks. Their kids studied 4 extra hours every day after school. And now look at them, Samsung, Hyundai, LG, world-class companies. That didn't happen by accident. That happened through discipline, through sacrifice, through building real productive capacity. China's doing the same thing, but on a scale that has never been seen before. They build more infrastructure in 1 year than most countries build in a decade. High-speed rail, ports, airports, power plants. They're building capacity, real, tangible, productive capacity. And what is America doing? We're fighting over whether we can afford to fix bridges that are falling down. We're running up debt to fund consumption. We're printing money to cover interest payments on previous debt. We're in a debt spiral. 36 trillion in debt. 900 billion in annual interest payments. That is larger than the defense budget. Think about that. We're spending more money just servicing our debt than we spend on our entire military. Second largest line item in the federal budget, and it is growing because we can't stop spending Social Security, Medicare, defense, infrastructure, all of it costs money. But we don't want to raise taxes. We don't want to cut spending, so we borrow more, which means higher interest payments, which means borrowing even more to cover those payments. It is a spiral, and there is only two ways out: default or inflate. No empire chooses default. So they inflate, they print, they debase the currency. The Federal Reserve printed $5 trillion during COVID. 40% expansion of the money supply in 2 years. Inflation hit 9.1% in 2022. Real wages collapsed. The dollar bought less. This is exactly what happened to the British pound. Exactly what happened to the Dutch guilder. Exactly what happened to the Spanish real. Stage 3 always ends the same way, which brings us to stage 4, inevitable replacement. And this is where most people get it wrong. They think it is going to be a crash, a dramatic collapse, some Hollywood movie where everything falls apart overnight. It is not. It is slow. It is gradual. It takes decades. The British transition took 36 years. The pound started losing status in 1914. It remained relevant until 1944. Then it was over. It became a regional currency, still used in the UK, still held by some former colonies, but no longer dominant, no longer the global reserve currency. The dollar's transition started in 2008, the financial crisis 16 years ago. If history repeats, and it always does, we're halfway through. By 2040, the dollar will be regional, still used in North America, still held by some allies, but no longer dominant. And what is replacing it? The yuan. Right now, the yuan is only 3% of global reserves. But 20 years ago, it was zero. The trajectory matters more than the position. China's building yuan infrastructure systematically. Currency swap lines with 40 countries. The CP system connecting 1,300 financial institutions across 100 countries. Bilateral trade agreements in yuan with Russia, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Indonesia. Each agreement chips away at dollar dominance. Each one creates yuan demand. This is exactly how the dollar replaced the pound. Not through force, not through some dramatic event, through utility, through natural market dynamics, through being useful for trade. And the yuan has something the dollar lost in 1971. Real backing production capacity. When you hold yuan, you can buy real Chinese goods, real manufactured products. China makes 30% of global manufacturing output. That creates structural demand. Nations need yuan to access Chinese production, just like they needed dollars to access American production in 1950. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I don't see how we bring back that age where an uneducated man can march ahead rapidly, as long as we have free trade and worldwide competition. And I don't want to stop having free trade with China, but we have to be realistic about what that means. It means we're competing with people who work harder, who save more, who invest more in education and infrastructure, who defer gratification. And if we want to compete with that, we need to do the same things, but we're not. We're doing the opposite. We're consuming more than we produce. We're borrowing from the future to fund today. We're letting our infrastructure crumble. We're fighting over pronouns while they're building bridges. We're printing money while they're building factories. The pattern is absolute. 4 stages, 4 empires, 4 currency transitions, the Dutch guilder, the Spanish real, the British pound, and now the American dollar. Each one rose to dominance. Through production, each one fell through overconsumption and currency debasement. You know what I find fascinating? Every single time the dominant power says this time is different. Every time the British said it, they thought their empire would last forever. The quarter of the earth they controlled, the Royal Navy that ruled the seas. London as the financial capital of the world, permanent, untouchable. And then it wasn't. Within 36 years it was gone, not destroyed, not conquered, just replaced, economically outcompeted by a rising power that built more, produced more, invested more. I don't have any particular animus toward China. I think they've done a remarkable thing. They've lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. They've built infrastructure at a scale that has never been seen. They've created productive capacity that is extraordinary, that is impressive, that is worthy of respect. But it comes at America's expense, not because they're stealing from us, but because there is only one global reserve currency at a time. Only one country that gets to print money and have the world accept it. Only one country that gets to run persistent trade deficits without consequence. For 70 years, that was America. We got that privilege because we earned it in stage one, because we built the most productive economy the world had ever seen, because the dollar was backed by real American productive capacity. But we've squandered that privilege. We've treated it like it is permanent, like it is our birthright, like we can just print money forever and the world will always accept it. And for a while, they did because of momentum, because of trust, because of habit. But trust erodes, habits change, and momentum runs out. That is stage 3. That is where we are now. The realization is spreading slowly, gradually, but unstoppably. The dollar isn't backed by production anymore. It is backed by debt, by printing, by military force, and that is not sustainable. So what do? Because understanding this isn't enough. You need to position yourself before stage 4 accelerates. First thing, audit your dollar exposure. How much of your wealth is denominated in dollars? How much is in dollar-based assets? If you're 100% dollar denominated, you're maximally exposed to this transition. That is not prudent. That is not wise. Diversify currencies, not speculation. Strategic diversification. Hold euros, Swiss francs, Singapore dollars, spread the risk 10 to 20% of liquid assets in non-dollar currencies. Because when the transition accelerates, and it will, you don't want everything tied to one currency that is losing status. Real assets. This is something Warren and I have always believed in. Own things that have intrinsic value, gold, physical gold you control. Not ETFs, not paper gold. Metal 5 to 15% allocation, but also productive assets, farmland, energy infrastructure, commodity production, things that produce value regardless of which currency dominates. Businesses that create real value. See's Candy makes chocolate people want to buy. Geico provides insurance people need. Burlington Northern moves goods across the country. These are real businesses producing real value. They'll survive currency transitions because they can adjust. They can raise prices. They provide something people actually need. But financial engineering derivatives, complex securities nobody understands. Those go to zero when systems reset. I watched it in 2008. AAA-rated securities, supposedly the safest things in the world, went to zero overnight. Because they weren't real. They were just promises built on other promises built on debt. Reduced dollar debt. This sounds counterintuitive. If the dollar is declining, doesn't inflation help debtors? In the short term, maybe, but during transitions, interest rates spike, credit disappears. If you're heavily indebted when credit markets seize, you're trapped. Pay down high interest debt, create financial flexibility. Invest in yourself. Build skills the new system values, technical skills, engineering, programming, manufacturing, things that create real value. Learn Mandarin if you're young. The next global business language might not be English. Develop relationships in rising economies. China, India, Southeast Asia. When systems shift, opportunities emerge. But only for those positioned to seize them. This isn't about politics. This isn't about rooting for America to fail. I love this country. I've spent my entire life here. I've benefited enormously from American society, from American capitalism, from American freedoms. I'm grateful for everything this country has given me. But gratitude doesn't mean blindness. Patriotism doesn't mean ignoring reality. And the reality is clear. The pattern is unmistakable. 4 stages, 4 empires, 4 currency transitions. We're in stage 3, stage 4 is coming. The Dutch had their moment. The Spanish had theirs. The British had theirs. America's having theirs right now. That is not tragedy. That is not failure. That is history. That is the cycle of civilization. Empires rise, they peak, they transition. New powers emerge. The cycle continues. The tragedy isn't the cycle. The tragedy is not seeing it, not preparing for it, not adapting to it, because the transition happens whether you acknowledge it or not. The dollar will lose reserve status. The yuan will gain prominence. New systems will emerge. The global order will reshape. You can resist that reality and suffer, or you can accept it and position accordingly. That is your choice. But the pattern doesn't care about your choice. The pattern continues regardless. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Mark Twain supposedly said that, though I'm not sure he actually did. But it is true regardless. The specifics change, the names change, the technologies change, but human nature doesn't change. And the fundamental dynamics of empire rise and fall don't change. Production creates wealth. Consumption without production destroys wealth. Currencies backed by production maintain value. Currencies backed by debt lose value. These aren't opinions. These are observable patterns repeated across centuries. And right now, America is consuming without producing. We're running up debt, we're printing money, we're weaponizing our currency, we're in the late stage of empire, the desperate stage, the stage where the dominant power does everything possible to maintain status, but in doing so accelerates their own decline. That is stage 3, and stage 4 is next. Not tomorrow, not next year, but soon within my children's lifetime, probably within the next 10 to 20 years. The transition will accelerate, the dollar will lose status, the yuan will gain it, and the global balance of power will shift. China won't rule the world the way America did. It'll be different culture, different system, different values, but they'll be the dominant economic power. They'll have the production capacity, they'll have the infrastructure, they'll have the growing middle class creating domestic demand, and nations will need yuan to access that market, to access that production, just like they needed dollars to access American markets and American production for the last 70 years. The cycle continues, always has, always will. The only question is whether you see it coming, whether you prepare, whether you position yourself on the right side of history. Because I promise you one thing, the pattern doesn't need your belief. It only needs time. And time, as they say, is running out for dollar dominance.